Assalamu alaikum, and welcome everyone again this morning. Sorry for the delay getting started. Again, we had some technical difficulties. Jazakum khairan for your patience. So we're delighted to have as our first speaker, Dr. Metra Azar-Salem. She was born in Kabul, Afghanistan, and came to the US when she was 2 years old. After she completed her undergraduate studies at UCI, she began working closely with refugee women and children from Afghanistan. The experience of working so closely with these new Afghan families inspired her to apply for her master's in marriage and family therapy at Aliyah University in Irvine. For her master's degree internship, she became a certified domestic violence counselor, and she worked for 2 years at a domestic violence shelter. After completion of her master's degree, she went on to complete her doctoral degree in psychology, again at Aliyah International University. Her dissertation focused on creating a curriculum to enhance cultural diversity training for mainstream therapists working with the Muslim population. Dr. Azar-Salem has a profound research interest in studying minority mental health issues, identity formation, spirituality in therapy, substance abuse, marginalization of minorities, couples therapy, parenting issues, PTSD, ADHD, and children of minorities who suffer from autism spectrum disorders. She was a school counselor at Metra Azar-Salem Elementary School for 3 years, and she currently works with children and adults in a private practice setting in Tustin. In addition, she teaches at Claremont Lincoln University as adjunct professor. She has always had an entrepreneur's vision, and as a result of her love of education, she is a business owner of the Mission Viejo Montessori. She is the mother of 3 boys and a baby girl, and she has been married for 18 years, mashallah. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Azar-Salem.
Assalamu alaikum. First and foremost, I would love to thank Ms. Siraj and ICOI for hosting me today. This is an amazing event that you guys are putting on today, and I wish you guys all success. Mental health is this too loud? Mental health is a subject that is very near and dear to my heart, and I've been working within the field, and I'm excited that we're finally talking about it in our messages, in our schools, in our communities, because it is impacting our population greatly. The topics that I'm going to be discussing today are autism and ADHD. So first I'm going to go through the PowerPoint, talk a little bit about the diagnosis, criteria, signs, symptoms, and resources within the community for all of you. But then I would love to have maybe a 10-minute, 5-minute discussion at the end on the impacts these diagnoses have on the family unit, whether it's a single mom, a married couple, extended family. How do we, in our community, the Muslim community, deal with these situations? So I'm gonna see if this works. So introduction. Autism spectrum disorders are a group of developmental disabilities that can cause significant social, communication, and behavioral challenges. They affect people in different ways and can range from mild to severe, according to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. So the fascinating thing about autism is there's no one way. So if I have, one child will have symptoms a different way than another will. So it's a very broad range of symptoms, and that's why sometimes it's hard to diagnose, because it manifests differently within each child. Autism has no single cause, and the number of diagnosed cases has risen sharply, 300% over the past 11 years. In 2012, the CDC reported that 1 in 88 American children had ASD, an increase from 1 in 150 in 2002. Recently, revised estimates point to an even higher rate of 1 in 50 children. ASDs are almost 5 times more common in boys than they are in girls. 1 in 54 boys and 1 in 252 girls. The Department of Education. In 2011, California Department of Education study found that 1% of all children enrolled in state's public schools are diagnosed with autism. Orange County particularly has the highest rate with 1.5%, 1 child in 63 3 children has been diagnosed with autism and is receiving special education services. Most of the time, it's caught in the school system, sometimes before parents notice they have challenges at home. In the last 10 years, the autism rate has increased nearly 5-fold in California. 1 in 94 children is receiving special education services for autism in 2011 compared to 1 in 431 a decade ago. So there's an increased rise in autism. And I'm choosing today not to talk about the different theories of why it is out there and what is causing it. There's a lot of controversy, and different research studies on what causes it, and there's no definitive answer on what specifically causes autism. So that could be a whole other panel discussion that I'm going to avoid today, and we're going to talk mostly about treatment and resources and what we can do to help these individuals. Diagnosis criteria, there's 5 of them. Persistent deficits in social communication. Social skills and social interactions is the most significant criteria in an autistic child. They prefer to shy away from social interaction. And it needs to be present in multiple contexts. So it needs to be present in like family life, school life, different contexts the child is a part of. Restricted repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities. So specific to the autistic child, they will be obsessive with the same behavior over an amount of time. They will obsess about playing with a specific kind of toy over and over again, a specific kind of activity, and not have a range of behaviors that they enjoy, or a range of activities that they enjoy. C, symptoms must be present in the early developmental period, but may not become fully manifest until social demands exceed limited capacities, or may be masked by learned strategies in later life. Now they're specifically wanting to diagnose in early childhood education, which is the 0 to 5. All of the research is telling us that early intervention helps, so they want to see these symptoms in the earlier years. D, symptoms cause clinical significant impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of current function. So there are kids who have these deficits, but it does not impact their daily lives. It doesn't impact, when it says occupational, for a child, occupational things are like putting their shoes on, feeding themselves, self-care, hygiene. It doesn't impact their day-to-day. When it does impact, it becomes a criteria for diagnosis. E, these disturbances are not better explained by intellectual disability, intellectual developmental disorder, or global developmental delay. Intellectual disability and autism spectrum disorder frequently co-occur to make comorbid diagnosis of autism spectrum disorders. And intellectual disability, social communication should be below that expected for general development level. So when they run the tests, they also run IQ tests. So there are children who are developmentally just delayed intellectually. And they need to make sure that these behaviors are not caused to the developmental or intellectual delays that they may have. And that could be something else. They could have a low IQ, they could just be intellectually delayed, which they will catch up later. So they need to rule that out, and through the battery of tests they do, they can figure this out. Behaviors. So according to the CDC, individuals with autism might not respond to their name by the age of 12 months, not point at objects such as an airplane flying overhead to show interest by 14 months. And all of this is in the handout. I have a handout in front, so you guys don't have to take this. I just wanted to let you guys know. Not play pretend games such as feeding a doll by 18 months, the imagination. Avoid eye contact and want to be alone. Have trouble understanding other people's feelings or talking about their own. Have delayed speech and language skills. Now, all of this may not be present. Sometimes children will have a few of these not present, but these are general behaviors that the CDC has put out there. Repeat words or phrases over and over again. Give unrelated answers to questions. Get upset at minor changes. Have obsessive interests. Flap their hands, rock their bodies, or spin in circles. Have unusual reaction to the way things sound, smell, taste, look, or feel. their sensories are a lot more sensitive than the average person. So if we think about all of our senses, ability to hear, smell, taste, touch, all of this in an autistic child is super sensitive. So, and it depends, each one will be different. There will be a child with autism that is very sensitive to hearing, but their touch is okay. Another one will be very sensitive to a specific kind of touch. So you can do pressure touch, but light touch irritates them. So there's a multitude of symptoms, and the way it manifests itself in each child will be different. That is the difficulty with autism, that within each child, you will see a varying amount of the symptoms. So this is where I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking to you about the impact. So in my experience, when a child has autism, it impacts everything in the home. It impacts the family. It impacts the marriage, the siblings, your social life. Education, obviously, is impacted when the student goes to preschool. I've dealt with children as early as 3 years old, where as soon as the parent enrolls them in the preschool setting, the teachers are calling home and saying, something's not right. All the kids are playing, and your child wants to be on the outskirts of the playground. All the children are eating, and he's very fidgety or has issues with texture in his food. There could be a perfume somebody's wearing in the classroom that can throw the student off. There could be, an accident another child has, and the smell throws them off. So they're super, super sensitive. And a lot of this starts when the child is enrolled in education, whether it's a preschool setting or a daycare setting. Because what happens with parents at home is that we accommodate. So from the time they're born till about 2 or 3, we notice, he doesn't like to play with other kids. He's very little. We'll just give him the toys that he likes. Sometimes they're very intellectual, and they're super hyper-focused on the alphabet, for example. And so the parents will say, well, he's just an academic. He's very smart. He doesn't like socializing. So as parents and family members, especially if it's your first child and that's all you've known, you tend to accommodate and work with the child in their interests and miss some of the things that maybe a school setting or a family setting or a social setting would make more apparent. So that's why we see a lot of this, when students start to go to school. Now, the regional centers in most counties, it's very, very valuable to have families get their child diagnosed under the age 3. You're eligible for more services. There's a lot more out there that you can do. Because autism affects so many things, I prefer the referral being, I'm going to scroll down, to a center and not an individual therapist. A center will have occupational therapy, speech therapy. They have social skills classes. So the referrals that I've made here are to centers where you take the child and they do full assessments, and then all of the needs are met in that center. Now, you can do it individually. You can start with the school district, get your child fully evaluated. If you have any questions within your mind that possibly your child could fit this criteria, I would go to my local school district first, because the government is mandated to give you a full assessment of your child. Under age 3, you would go to a regional center. A regional center is also a government-funded center that will do a full evaluation. They are mandated that if you request as a parent, then they do need to fulfill that and get that full evaluation. That full evaluation in a private setting could cost up to $3,000 to $4,000. And there are parents who go the private setting route as well. But your first option would be the school setting or regional centers. Now, there are families that feel that their child has autism, and the school system and the regional center has told them that their child is fine. And there's advocacy groups fighting for these parents because they want the diagnosis. In our community, I find that we don't want the diagnosis. When I treat and see individuals and parents, we shy away from the labels. We think the labels are going to identify our child a certain way, and that label is going to stick with them, and everybody's going to know. Our community, we come a little bit from a shame-based community, and so when there's a problem, we rather cover it and say, oh, he'll grow out of it, he'll be fine. But actually the label helps. The label with autism helps. The government is mandated to give you these services for for that child's entire life, almost up to 18. So when we don't get the label, then it falls back on you to get private help, which costs a lot of money. And if you were to go to get OT and therapy and speech pathology, and if your insurance doesn't cover it, then the parents are burdened financially with all of this as well. So my first recommendation is to go to your local school districts, go to your regional center of whatever city, county that you live in, and try to get your child in. With the services, they may improve in certain areas, and certain kids improve a lot, and certain kids do not. And so that's the thing with all the research in autism. They have all these treatment therapies out there. I send like some of my kids, and they go and they really develop speech and they get better, and some kids go and they don't. So it's like a hit or miss. They don't have an exact science to it. Newer and newer things are coming out. Now there's stem cell research coming out on helping children with autism. There's neurofeedback, which is something they do with children with autism. There's these new centers called Brain Balance. They work in a different way. It's cognitive and OT combined. And the goal for parents are to treat the symptoms. All they want is for that child to be able to function in their day-to-day. And sometimes they can't. And this is where the four resources are the regional center, the school district, Chalk Hospital has an amazing autism center, and the UCI Child Development Center in Irvine also treats, diagnoses, and actually has an on-site preschool that will accommodate these needs. They have social skills classes, behavior modification classes. And the last recommendation is the family therapy for family members. So today you guys are going to have a lot of family therapists, a lot of psychologists present to you. And dealing with anything outside the regular affects the family. So when there's a child who has so many needs and requires so many appointments and cannot sit at the table, and the sounds of the house bother them, and the smells of the house bother them, and the voices bother them, this will impact your marriage. It will impact how you deal with your other kids. It will impact siblings. I see siblings of children with autism. It's a huge, huge burden on them because they need to learn how to process it. They need to be educated on why their sibling is reacting a certain way to them. It's very easy for us to label the child with autism as bad, and children, in their interactions with this child will feel that it's not fair. Why is my mom giving special treatment to him versus me? So I think an entire session with a family therapist with the entire family present is very important, so that other siblings, the husband, the wife, they can have a plan, a treatment plan, and also make time for these other children that are in the home, because it impacts everybody. A lot of times in our community, I've had families that got a divorce over this because husband and wife are not on the same page. Wife wants treatment, husband does not want treatment, doesn't believe in the system, doesn't want to get the kid in the system, or vice versa. So it causes a lot of distress in relationships as well, because it's hard once again to have a child that is having behaviors that you can't control. And so having the family meetings, meeting with the family therapist, taking care of yourselves, because taking care of a child with these needs is going to require a lot more of you, is very, very important. So the family therapy may not be necessarily for the child with autism, but it really is important to kind of see where you're at with all of this, because emotionally it's very draining, it's exhausting. Our parents, the way we parent is very attached, and so if something is wrong with our child, that means something is wrong with me. Then mothers question themselves, Father, did we do something wrong? And usually it's not in your control. There are ways that you can, with a therapist that works with children with autism, help that child. Structuring your household a different way, having set routines, minimizing his triggers will help the family function better, as well as the child with autism. But there's no blame, there's no fault, there's no shame. This was not a product of, how you raised the child. And so that's the piece that in our community sometimes is challenging, because for example, you're going to an event, a social party, and in our community, we have that where if a child's behaving poorly or there's something that looks outside of the box, we feel like we need to hide it, or there's shame involved. And so having these conversations with your family, having a plan, setting up a plan, okay, we're going to so-and-so's birthday party, but if Jibril starts to have these issues, whose turn is it to take him outside for a walk? So everybody doesn't have to miss the festivities, or it's Eid, and we know there's going to be like lots of people at Eid prayer, which overwhelms him. How are we going to work on this together as a team? So it's very vital that we pre-plan things instead of just, because as we said in the very beginning, as I said in the presentation, this is a social impairment. So social gatherings, social activities, sensory overload are triggers for these children. They prefer to be in quiet, alone settings, because once they're triggered, they can't calm their senses down. And that's the control that we have and they don't. And so they need external forces. There was a child I worked with for many years, and every day, so I typically don't believe in reward and punishment for little kids and buying them things. But this mom had to buy him, I think it was like a little cars that he was collecting. He was obsessed with these cars, and there was an obsession with these cars. And so she worked with the preschool teacher, and if he knew that he was getting the car at the end of the day or at noon, from 8 a.m. to noon, he held it together. He would be able to sit in circle time, not run away from the car. And so these kinds of things, therapies, work with these children. And some of the kids they don't work with, but for these children, that little token was a huge deal. It was used as a training device for this child to learn how to sit in the group. And so using those things temporarily to get them trained really worked well for preschool. So every day she would have to show up at noon at lunchtime with that little car. He would see it, and he would get through the rest of his day. So there's many different ways to work with these children, and you with your therapist or with one of these centers would sit individually and make a plan. But I can't emphasize enough more on how to take care of yourselves and become support systems for one another. Outside of our community, there's a lot of support groups for moms with autism, dads, with children with autism. If you guys go on meetups.com, which have meetups for everything, and you just type in Asperger's, autism, they literally meet like every week. And being around parents who have struggled with this can really, really assist you emotionally to be there for that child. And also you learn techniques, you learn something somebody did might help, I remember this mom once shared at one of these meetings that, in front of the child's, in the bathroom, he would go in the bathroom and just be there for like 45 minutes. And they would constantly call him out, and he would just sit there. And so one mom shared that I have this little chart in front of the sink, literally, which says, like, use the bathroom, wash your hands, brush your teeth, with pictures. They're very visual. And after she put this little chart up, his bathroom routine changed. So it was something she picked up at one of these support groups. Sequencing and doing things from point A to point B is hard. You'll send them to go get your shoes, and then they'll just be there. They'll get their shoes, but they'll forget that, okay, now I need to come back. So this happens naturally in our brains. We finish one task, we move to the next. And these children, the move to the next doesn't happen. So they get in trouble for it. They get yelled at for it. Like, why are you standing there staring into space? I sent you to clean up your toys, and then you're there. That automatic thing doesn't happen. That's why charts, visuals, aids, cues help these children transition. If you hear a lot of teachers who deal with these kids, they always say these kids don't transition well. And there's a lot of transitions in school. School is part of, the way the public school or private school system is set up is that we transition a lot. There's, morning time, there's recess, there's lunch, there's PE, there's all of these transitions. And that's why school manifests the behaviors more than anywhere else, because at home, we don't have a routine that strict on a time constraint. But in school, we have 15 minutes to clean up, and we have 5 minutes to get out to lunch, and then it's bathroom time. So that's why in school, these children have a difficult time thriving, because there's so many transitions. So there are school options for these children as well. Finding a school program, a lot of families will find like a Montessori program where there's less transition and there's more hands-on. Or they'll find an artsy school that's focused on kind of what their talent is, that child. So certain programs these kids fit better in. And as a parent, it takes a lot of time and research to figure out what kind of education fits best for my child. And some parents do homeschool. It's just too much. Having all of the behavioral issues at school overwhelms them. So then when you homeschool, then you have to debate the social skills. How are we going to get this child's social skills with homeschooling this child? So there's a lot of factors, and I think having a therapist for yourself that you sit with and plan all of these things out with will assist you to be a better parent to this child. And they are also some of the most amazing children. I have to say, I've had autistic, clients, and they're the most fascinating people in the world. And sometimes in my mind of minds, I think, wow, we think something is, going on with them. They probably think we're crazy. Honestly, they come up with the most intellectual, the most creative, the most in-depth conversations. They're very creative. They, there was a child on the internet who figured out the iPad, and she started communicating through iPad. She never spoke, but started communicating. And what she wrote about it, I think it's published somewhere, I have to find her name, was fascinating, because everybody thinks that they're not thinking the same way as we are, and they're not able to function, but they are. They're full human beings. Their sensitivities, their social deficiencies may look like deficiencies to us, but inside they do understand and comprehend, and it's not like a mental retardation or developmental delay of that sort. Intellectually, they are functioning in their own in their best capacities. So they have been really some of the most amazing clients for me. I learn from them a lot of times because they have a different perspective of life and the world. And so we as a community need to become more receptive on getting them services so that they can function and have their day-to-day, but also accepting and kind of looking for what their gifts are, because they do have gifts, they do have talents, and highlighting them. And sometimes the typical school system can highlight the deficits more than they do the gifts, and then that starts this cycle of negative self-esteem, something is wrong with me, because once you put a child in the school system, they start to compare themselves to everybody else. And so when you don't fit in, it becomes an emotional battle for that child. And the younger they are, we recommend play therapy so that even the child who's not verbal can deal with their emotions in a play environment. So these centers that I put up here are resources that have a little bit of both. They have a little bit of OT, speech, play therapy. They'll do the full assessment for you. So you won't be like walking around looking for all of these. It's hard as a parent to piece all the puzzles, put them all together and find out what's the best for your child. So let's stop for a minute. I talked a lot, and see if you guys have any questions for, I know my other topic is ADHD, but I want to see if you guys have any questions, comments with regards to autism.
Do you have resources for adults
With autism?
Yes.
Okay. I will add those onto here. I don't have them on this list. I would have met the regional center deals with the younger kids. There's a few that I know of that are not on here, but definitely I will email the organizers, and maybe they can send it out to you guys. Yes. Thank you for reminding me. Any other questions? Yes. Do they label them as spoiled kids? Yes, they do, because typically these children are accommodated. Whether they're in school, whether they're at home, people do more for these kids. And so they are labeled as spoiled. There's also an arrogance that they're labeled with, because they choose not to interact with everybody, and that makes you look like you're arrogant. Like, what's wrong with you? He doesn't want to be my friend, she doesn't want to talk to me. I've had teenagers who have been labeled as arrogant because they don't want to interact, they don't want to socialize, they don't go and say salam to everybody. And that's not because they're arrogant, it's because it's hard for them. It is literally hard for them to look you in the eye and say Assalamu alaikum and greet you and have this inner exchange. And so in our community, that is labeled as spoiled, arrogant, not respectful of the elders. These are all the labels we put. And social skills can't be taught to these children. You can't teach them. I had a family whose son would not join a soccer team, would not let guests would come and he would hide. But there was a few kids that he liked. And so they literally made a soccer team around those kids. Usually it's a few that they're okay with, that they're comfortable with. And so they would practice, going over somebody's house. With these specific, they would figure out ways to invite these kids over and have social gatherings so that this child would learn. But you're absolutely right, they are labeled as spoiled.
You mentioned that it's better to diagnose the child before they get treated. For example, parents miss that and they blood diagnosis after they get treated. What are the services that they're going to lose? And if they do lose some of the services, what are their options in order to cover these services that they are telling them need?
So if you've missed the under 3, usually the regional center is where you go under 3. After 3, the school district would do the full panel of assessment if you're guessing that there is autism there. So the school district, if you get an autism diagnosis, should provide these services. What's happening lately is the school district is diagnosing less and less. It's becoming expensive for the district to cover all of these kids. So a lot of parents go private route. I mean, their PPOs will cover, an expensive psychologist will run all the, the tests. But there are families who fight the school district, and they fight for that, evaluation and diagnosis. And then they'll go, so there will be families who will go get an individual diagnosis outside of the school district and take it back to the school and say, look, my child, was tested for this, and this is what they got. Educational psychologists do it, regular child psychologists do the battery of assessments, but you need that assessment first. All the research says treatment, earlier intervention is better, so that's why they want to catch it earlier. But there are plenty of families who don't catch it under 3. That's very common, very common. And the school district should still do it. You should be, the local elementary school of your neighborhood is where you walk in and say, I want my child to be fully evaluated. Even if they're not a student there. If it's your local elementary in your neighborhood, even if your child does not go to that school, they're required to do the assessment.
After the age of 3, do you think the school district is enough for them? Or
My preference I would say no, because the school district gives you the minimum. And it goes into planning. I mean, you have to meet with the psychologist, a private one. You may have to change your insurance. It's worth it to have a good PPO to be able to not have to wait for referral and specialists. Getting a lot of occupational therapy treatments helps, and that's very expensive. So if you had a good PPO that would cover your OT appointments and you don't need a referral, that would help. So you have to financially sit there and figure out what's the best way. I find families that have insurances that cover a lot of these more successful just because they can go to that OT twice a week. Maybe they can pay for one of them on their own, but at least the insurance will cover, the other 2. The school district, will give you the minimum. It'll give you because they have a lot of students. Certain insurances will give you the minimum. I find that the PPOs, whatever PPOs are out there, are more beneficial to families with this. And I think with Covered California now, a lot of families are getting PPOs. So there's a family that I was just recently working with, and low income, and they applied for Covered California. But in Covered California, she got Blue Cross Blue and PPO, so she's able to choose her own doctors within Covered California, which is amazing because you couldn't do that, 3-4 years ago. So the Kaiser setup, it's minimal too. I know the clients I've had with Kaiser, it's minimal. They can only get so many with the HMOs. So it's a whole financial planning thing that you need to go through. But there are groups and advocacy, and if you search online, Autism Now is a website that you will find resources and how other parents have done it. Reading stories will also assist you.
Yeah, so my question is related to the educational development of
What, I'm sorry?
educational development of the child.
Yes.
my observation is the school districts do minimal work, or one size fits all, because they have rules.
Sure.
When do you make the decision, and what options are available for a parent when they feel like the educational system is not sufficient enough to develop their child? I've met this kid that his parents sued the school system and they moved him into a private school where he got special education, special attention, and he's excelling. I have a child who's normal by all means, but from the educational development point of view, she's not developing because she's not getting both the assistance or the assessment about her own needs. So, what's your
So your question is, when does a family decide to do something alternative?
exactly, because the school district is not. I feel like the school district is not pinpointing the problem, and they're not spending enough time to develop the child.
So I
The
agree.
child has some medical conditions that are brain related, and the school district doesn't go that route. So
Yes.
the full spectrum of educational development, what options are available for
So,
parents?
yeah, so you're absolutely right. There are a lot of parents who decide, there are a lot of parents who decide to get more resources and help outside of the district. That's where I say is your first stop, but most parents don't stop there. And again, it relates to the financial pieces, because if you're going to go and have more assessments, more tests, there's so many, there's different treatment options out there. You have to look at it financially, what's the best for your family, to have more assessments and more resources. And also, there's a lot of, you guys are going to have, I believe, Dr. Miriam Saidi come by today and also do a talk. And there's a lot of nonprofit centers too now that will do these assessments for you. And she actually runs one of them here in Irvine, and I know they do the full assessment of these children at a low cost. So even online, if you research for nonprofit centers for autism, there are many of them that can do these assessments for you guys if you don't want to stop, at the school district. There are resources. I think autism is very prevalent, and there's a lot of nonprofit organizations, and there's even schools for autistic children now. They have specific private schools set up to meet their needs. There's one here in Santa Ana, I can't remember the name of it right now, but there's one in Santa Ana and one in South County. There are schools, but again, it's a financial question, and a lot of these schools get funding. So there was a family that thought they couldn't afford the tuition of the school because obviously it's very expensive. But when they went to the school, they had financial aid. So there are a lot of people donating money to this cause. They went to the school and they enrolled him in a program that meets his needs now. It's a private school. I think the regular cost was about $30,000 a year because it has OT on site, it has sensory on site, it has speech, but everything you needed was in the school day. But this family thought, I can't afford it. But once they went and did the tour, the center director said, apply for financial aid. We have donors that apply for families that can't afford it. And they did, and they got a percentage of it paid for. So, so I would not stop because of the financial reasons. I would still pursue the organization or the psychologist or the nonprofit and see what they can do for you. I think there is a lot of money coming into this field, and there's a lot of people who want to help, especially people who have had personal experiences. So I would pursue resources outside of the public school system as well. I definitely believe that it wouldn't be, it's enough for some kids, but not for everybody. And it's based again on the individual child's needs. Sure. So you're not sure of the diagnosis you received based on the pediatrician's questionnaire? Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, are there more
Yes, there are extensive testing. So if you're just going through, the pediatrician usually gives you the first But if you do get a diagnosis with a pediatrician, I would ask for a refer to like a child psychologist to do more assessments. Now in a school setting, they will do that. They have psychologists who will do those assessments, but I think the pediatrician does the first basic one, but there is more extensive testing. Yeah, and if your child is at home versus if there's a school setting, then you get a different context as well. So you get teacher's perspective as well, than just parents. And multiple people fill out those forms if they're part of a school setting or a preschool or a child care center. Yeah, but the pediatrician is usually the first assessment, but I would pursue further assessment. Yeah. And saw another hand.
I have a question for you, Mr. Project. First of all, I was wondering what the pathways that students can go to help or to work with the young children or adults or adolescents with autism. And then I was also wondering if you are a family member or someone who's been diagnosed with autism, how do you encourage, how do you motivate, how do you change the environment around them, especially Islamically, to accommodate for their needs?
What's specific to what when you say Islamically?
I don't know. It's just like you always hear about autism in the news or something like that, but a lot of times if you haven't been exposed to it, if it hasn't occurred, or if you don't have a child in your family who has autism, then you don't talk about it in an Islamic context as Muslims that a child has autism. How do you also incorporate that into their lives?
Oh, how do you incorporate Islam into the child who has autism? I see. Okay, I thought you were asking me, how does a Muslim family deal with a child who has, how do you teach them?
Yeah.
So I'm not an Islamic scholar. I just want to put that on the plate. So maybe we'll have somebody who's presenting today who is. So I don't know the requirement of teaching Islam to a child who has disabilities. I don't know what that requirement is. In my mind, do you have a comment to that?
It depends on the ability of the child. So
It depends on the ability of the child.
So I mean, anything that the child cannot comprehend, cannot do, then he's not obligated, he's not accountable for. But there is a responsibility on the parents to teach. So there is a responsibility on the parents to teach, and they do their part, and then whatever the child can absorb is going to be good enough. And we are not, there is no specific criteria, like if he is severely autistic, then we teach him only Surah Al-Fatiha. There's nothing like that. So you only do your part in teaching, and then see how the child responds to it. And keep in mind that Islam is actually absorbed in the family. So if the family is practicing Islam, the autistic child is seeing Islam being practiced, and that's another level of the teaching that's going on. But for the accountability piece, it's dependent on what the child is capable of, and this comes from a hadith, a specific hadith that we're interpreting it or we're analyzing it that deals with the level of mental competency of people and accountability. So.
I thought you were addressing our Islamic responsibility towards them, and I felt like in a house that is Muslim, an autistic child should have more compassion, more feeling of belonging. I've worked with family members very close to me, and I think the one thing that they need to feel is that they do belong, because everywhere in the world that they go, they don't. So whether it's a sports team they can't join, whether it's a classroom they can't sit in, whether they're fidgety, my advice to parents, number one, is that if your child never changed, if none of these resources helped him or her, then you accept them for what they are at that moment in their life. And I think that really helps the child out a lot, because the struggle of him learning how to be social, how to take care of themselves, all of those things are so hard for them, things that come naturally for us. And that driven with love and compassion always works versus the opposite of punishing that child for not being able to do things that he wasn't born with, those abilities. Those are things, a lot of times, like our brother said, that they're labeled as spoiled or lazy, And that's not necessarily true. They're just wired differently. And if the sooner the parents can accept that, instead of being punitive with that child, they will see more compassion and success. So there are autistic kids that I've observed that are more violent versus those who are very compassionate and kind and loving. And if you go into their families and their households, you will see the nurturing environment and acceptance of these children with their abilities versus those who are punished. And that style of, you're not going to sit at the table, you're going to throw your spoon on the floor, and they were punished. And those children lash out violently as adults, as teenagers. So, they both have the same thing, but you take their context and you switch it to a compassionate, loving environment, and the results are different. These kids don't have to be violent. They really don't. They don't have to be violent, and sometimes I feel like all the pressures of, school setting, teacher, academics, parents, builds up, and if they don't have verbal communication, and they don't have social communication, it is going to manifest itself violently, and it doesn't have to. It doesn't have to. So it takes a lot on parents' part to be able to, be compassionate and loving and pick that thing up after they've spilled it like 20 times. But it does make a difference long term. As far as volunteering or working with these individuals, there's multiple opportunities to work with these. All of these places you can volunteer in. They do require some sort of training and certification. In the occupational therapy environment, there's a lot of people who want to go into that field of study, so they take interns. School districts will hire individual college students to work one-on-one with these kids, and they do go through some certification. But there are ways to work with these individuals, but you would have to get some training and certification to kind of fully understand their scope before you work with them.
On an Islamic perspective, and how to Imam Azar-Salem has a new organization called mohsin.org, and that he even goes into how to talk to our mosques to have, accommodate these kind of kids, because again, as you said, in our community, if a child is misbehaving in a mosque, then people are going to raise their eyebrows. So how to have special rooms for these kids, and then also how to talk to schools in regards to that child being Muslim. So if anybody wants to go to mohsin.org, Imam Azar-Salem has a huge
That's awesome.
stuff. Yeah.
Because most places now have accommodations. If you're taking your children to Disneyland, there's an accommodation for a child with autism. You have to call them up ahead of time. They will provide these accommodations for them. But you're absolutely right. Our mosques need to get on board and provide these accommodations for these families. So,
I want to share. I work in the public school system at the elementary level, and we have more problem with the parents accepting that they have an autistic child. Even the bilingual children, for the parents were so, they were going trauma and said, okay, you're labeling my kid as bilingual. So it was very difficult for them to accept that their child is autistic because of the stigma that it will be there forever. So it took us a while before they could even fill out the paperwork, and some of them pulled the child out. And
that's very true.
exactly, and they thought, because as a bilingual teacher, I was at their conferences with the principal and the psychologist, all that this child needs help. But they thought that this kid would be fine with the normal kids and will develop those on its own.
Yeah, and this is a struggle for our parents, a lot of parents, not just our community. No parent wants to hear that your child is going to have to be on the special track. There needs to be accommodations, so every child, whether the label is autism, whether it's ADHD, whether it's anything, parents struggle with that. Parents want to not have to deal with something outside of the box. But, I try to normalize it with my clients and tell them, everybody has stuff. Everybody has some kind of stuff. Yours just happens to be autism, whereas another family, it's something else. So talking about it more in our community, normalizing it, having these kinds of events, I think will allow for parents to see that label actually empowers your child to get services, empowers them to get the help that they need. Am I out of time already? Okay. So the rest of my presentation.
I have a very good question regarding the resources that the county health department have.
Who's asking you a question? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you.
No, I'm sorry, I'm taking more time.
Oh, it's okay.
I work for the county health department. Does county health department have any resources to help do these assessments?
The county?
County health department.
The county health department.
Do they have resources?
Yes, so the county health department has a mental health division. And so I think the county health department is the umbrella organization, but underneath that organization you have the regional center, you have the mental health services underneath that organ. I think if you went directly to county health, I don't know if they specifically have resources, I'm not aware, maybe you are, but I know they have, the Orange County Mental Health Department does have resources.
Yeah, but then there is another question that if a child at very young age is autistic, people will be very hesitant going to the mental health.
I see. Yeah, so if their child is very young, I think the first stop would be the regional center. And they are funded by the Orange County Mental Health Department.
Thank you.
So the next area of discussion was ADHD, which we're not going to get to. It's all in the handbook, the handout. Basically, it's a diagnosis criteria, an introduction to the two different types. The only comment I want to make to ADHD that I'd like to leave you guys with, perhaps I won't have a chance to go through all of this, is that it doesn't necessarily need to have the hyperactive component. There are children that are inattentive, that are being disciplined for their inattention, and because they're forgetting or unorganized, or they don't follow instructions, or they have listening problems, and there is an inattentive type of ADHD that we need to be aware of, and it's in your handout, and you can look at it. And also, this can be diagnosed at any of these centers, and also at your local school districts as well.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Azar-Salem. That was such an informative talk, and you bring a lot of experience to the table. So thank you so much for enlightening us.
Thank you.